The thing that we try to look for is something that wins across the board. This is the kind of impact that we see coming out of these projects. We find something here in Charlottesville, we poke at it, we investigate it, we figure out what's going on, and sometimes we wind up going to Richmond and saying, hey, there's something real here and the law should change, and then the whole state can benefit.
Welcome to Pilot Projects, Stories from the Jefferson Trust, brought to you by the Sound on Grounds team at the University of Virginia Library. I'm Jason Evans Groth. Back when my job was guitar player in a band that toured internationally, I had to learn to deal with one of the most difficult parts of being a professional musician playing live gigs night after night: waiting. One of my bandmates was a barista when we weren't on the road, and he and I would deal with waiting by visiting local coffee shops and sampling everything we could. I learned that the same bean roasted on the same day, but brewed at two different places, would taste completely different. It fascinated me. It taught me that coffee was produce, an ever-changing thing that could make for a unique experience when brewed by different hands. Later, I co-owned a bakery and coffee shop and got really, really deep in the weeds regarding coffee brewing. I wanted our customers to have the best cup every time, and I wanted it to be consistent across baristas. At some point, I bought a refractometer so I could brew a cup of coffee and then analyze it to test the total dissolved solids in the brew. A number that tells you, objectively, how, for lack of a better word, well you brewed the coffee in order to bring out its inherent flavor and sweetness. Myself and a colleague brewed and brewed, tested and tested, and eventually collected enough data that we could, to a pretty consistent degree of certainty, find the best flavor of a bean based on grind size, weight, brew time, and water temperature. I already knew how objective data points could be used to help us solve all sorts of problems in other domains, but the fact that the very subjective concept of a good cup of coffee could be reflected in a number and then, in reality, be experienced through taste helped me understand, in a microcosmic way, how data could be used to sort through so many other kinds of subjective issues. Here at UVA, faculty in the School of Data Science are using data to help improve a system that is much larger, but nevertheless has so many subjective components: the criminal justice system. Sarah Bastinelli and I on the Sound on Grounds team took a little field trip to the UVA School of Data Science one very hot summer afternoon to talk to one of the faculty members who is digging into this work. I'll let him introduce himself.
My name is Loretto Peter Alonzi III. I go by Pete or Peter, usually. The Jefferson Trust funded the Criminal Justice Data Training Initiative, or CJDTI.
We asked Peter about how the Criminal Justice Data Training Initiative got started.
The origin of this whole initiative goes back to 2006, and there was a capstone project in the Systems Engineering Department in the School of Engineering, where they were working with something called CIT, or Crisis Intervention Team. And this is an idea about taking a new approach into how we deal with people who are in crisis and encounter the criminal justice system. And everything sprung from that initial partnership and grew. And so what I saw as first, I was actually in the UVA library at the time as a data scientist, and now here in the School of Data Science, was an opportunity to bring a lot of the spirit of that project, which focused on the systems engineering components of the criminal justice system in Charlottesville, to the School of Data Science and look at the data-specific questions and challenges. Often, there would be something that the systems engineering students couldn't tackle because they hadn't developed the data science chops to deal with that issue. And it's not to say those students could, but they're doing it as a capstone at the end of their fourth year, and there's not the time to build that maturity. Whereas with the data science students, we could tackle those things. And so that was really where it came from, was I love what they do. I see an opportunity for us to take inspiration and build the Criminal Justice Data Training Initiative here in the School of Data Science.
Can you just give an overview of what the carceral system in Charlottesville is? What exactly exists?
The main thing that we look at is there are 2 jails in the area. The Albemarle-Charlottesville Regional Jail, that's the one that's most likely to be involved, and that's the one we have the strongest relationship with. But you also have the Central Virginia Regional Jail. Then you get to police jurisdiction, which is very complicated. So in Virginia, cities are not part of counties. And so you have the Charlottesville Police Department and the Albemarle County Police Department. And then you also have the university, which has a footprint both in the city and in the county. And they have their own university police department. And so now you have this interaction. They have understandings between these agencies on how they operate. And then you go one level earlier in the system, walking you back through the sequential intercept model as we talk about it. You have the Emergency Call Center, or ECC, where all the calls get routed to one spot. So at least there we've got a place, and then they can get the call to fire rescue or to county police or whatever happens to be appropriate.
Tell us about your community partners and why it's important for students to have connections with them.
I was talking about the initial project from the systems engineering department. And the fulcrum of that partnership is between the faculty at UVA and the local criminal justice planner. Right now it's Matt Vitale, but there have been several planners over the years. And because the faculty members are the ones who already have these connections established and can bring them year after year after year to the new students who arrive to the program. It's the strength of that relationship. What we do is it sort of accelerates the student's ability. Like, it is known before we even have the students selected for that year's cycle in the capstone, or if I'm recruiting a new student on the data science side into the CJDTI, we already know, okay, here's Matt. This is Matt Vitale, the criminal justice planner, and he can't wait to meet you. He expects to meet you. Have you called him yet to go to his office to meet with him? If you look at the values of the Jefferson Trust and making those unique experiences for students, it starts right there from day one, and they go talk to him, and then based off the needs of wherever we're going, that guides which other partners the students then interact with. So it goes through the planner, and that sort of gets on the other critical part of this relationship, which is that the goals, the objectives, the initiatives, whatever we happen to do, aren't chosen by the UVA personnel. It is the people out in the community who are actually doing the work and having to make the decisions, who say, these are the things that matter to us, these are our priorities, and we on the UVA side are really looking to serve them. So I think the last key piece to mention would be the EBDM, or Evidence-Based Decision-Making Policy Team. That is a group of people who are at the highest levels of the different organizations. We're talking the jail superintendent, chief of police, Commonwealth's attorney, folks like that, amongst many others. And that group has developed a strategic plan with clear goals. How do we measure it? What do we want to get done? And so when we bring the students to work with those partners, then we pick up their challenges and help them in a way that a lot of these organizations, they don't have the budget for data analysis. Or if they do have the budget for data analysis, it's very often this person is trying to meet these requirements that we have to do for reporting, and the bandwidth is already full, just doing their job.
What exactly is criminal justice planner?
There's a National Association of Criminal Justice Planners, so it's bigger than just Charlottesville has a guy doing a thing. And so, for example, he will go to conferences and talk to other people who are in this role. And sometimes if you hear it wrong, it sounds like his job is to plan just crime or something. But no, that's not what it's about. Definition by example might help. One of the challenges we faced was the jail population. And the jail population was trending in a direction where we'd have to actually add on and expand the local jail here in Charlottesville. And the criminal justice planner, along with, in this case, the superintendent of the jail, were looking at this issue. Before you go pouring concrete and doing anything, you want to make sure that's the right decision. And so working with us, they were able to look at what are all of the reasons why people are being brought to the jail. They're being booked into the jail, they're staying at the jail, they're being returned to the jail. And so the criminal justice planner can then take that bigger view. work on making projections, analyzing trends. We were looking at projections that would have taken the jail population as high as 900 individuals. We have this metric, which is sort of a rolling average of the general population because it fluctuates. It was trending as high as 900, and today it sits around 280. And so there's been a whole host of nooks and crannies about what we focused on doing. And to be clear, our things mostly focus on people who aren't violent felons. We don't really work in the space dealing with anything like that. And I just wanted to make that clear, that this is not we're just trying to say you shouldn't be in jail or anything like that.
I took a local politics class right when all the discussions about the jail and if they were happening, and then I ended the class before the decision was made, and I never looked into it.
Was this on the jail renovation?
Yes.
I mean, they've been talking about the need for renovation. One of the things the students do, because we try to give them unique experiences, something to help them ground the spreadsheet full of numbers into an experience they've had in their life so they understand what the numbers represent and they don't just have to imagine. It's not just abstract. All of our students go on, for example, a tour of the jail. And if you take a tour of the jail, you can see that the building needs to be renovated because it happens to be a building in the real world that needs a renovation. I'm not trying to make a political statement. Our position in all this stuff from UVA is we stay on the outside of that and just try to help people get the best information they can.
It seems like data science can help in that regard because we can use these numbers, get to actual facts about what might make things better, whether that's renovations or numbers of people or how services are being provided. How is data science related to criminal justice? What type of questions are you really looking to answer?
As a professor in a school of data science, I should say it's everything. I should try to take some massively expansive thing. But I'll push my own personal agenda about data science, which is to say, when people sign up to do work these days, and in particular if you're doing something that's scientific, but whatever you're doing, usually there's some component where you're collecting data, you're recording facts, figures, whatever it happens to be. And as a result of doing that collection, there are consequences. And some of those consequences are felt mathematically, as in I cannot reduce the uncertainty on my standard deviation, whatever your thing happens to be. There are also some of those consequences that aren't felt mathematically at all. And so if you could imagine a system where you were collecting biometric data on people, we could wind up in a 1984 situation or something like that. And I mentioned that example because I'm sort of steering us in the criminal justice direction here. And one of the things that I think is very good about our system is that we do not have a unified database of individuals throughout the whole system. There's the jail, there's the police department, there's the local community service board, Region 10, which has healthcare information, there's the emergency control center, who answers when 911 is called, all these kind of things. Sometimes we have a question that is asked that is coming from the best place, which is, okay, someone goes into the jail, they lose their healthcare coverage because they're incarcerated. The jail provides medical coverage. When they leave the jail, do they get back connected with ongoing medical treatment that they need? Well, if they'd be someone who would be a patient at Region 10, we'd love to check the Region 10 database to see. But there's no common identifier between those two databases. I think it's a very good thing. And again, I made a reference to 1984. I think it's a great thing that we don't have that common identifier. I'd much rather live in that world. But it makes a challenge when you're trying to figure those details out. And you're trying to find out if this person who we gave all this information to, did they in fact get connected? Now imagine you're trying to evaluate a program at the jail where you work with inmates to try to help them understand their medical needs and what they need to do when they leave the jail. And you want to evaluate the effectiveness of that by looking at, did they then connect with those downstream services? And the UVA hospital says, under no circumstance can you come across this wall and look at our data. You can send us stuff and we'll look at it. It's comforting to me that people don't just have everything totally connected, but it also makes it hard to evaluate some programs which could be theoretically completely fine to do. I picked to address it that way and talk more about the essence of what data is and how data sets could be connected and joined to each other.
I'm often frustrated when I go to a different healthcare provider and they don't automatically have my information. There are certain things that we just don't handle very well that could be shared, especially between trusted providers.
I also love it that the cops maybe don't know what I did at the hospital. But what is this really well situated to answer?
I think a great example that is, it starts to dip a toe into the political waters. And there was a report that was commissioned by Charlottesville and Albemarle County that was released in January of 2020. So not the greatest timing to drop information on the world. And if I understand the history of it correct, the report was commissioned coming out of everything that happened in 2017. And it was specifically looking at interactions based on race and racial disparities in the criminal justice system in and around Charlottesville. And this report was commissioned from external consultants. If someone is doing this report and the analysis about themselves, it does not give you the confidence that an outside external thing would look at. What the report found was a list of findings. However, it also came with the caveat, for example, to use their language, they use the language white and African American, which is a tricky definition to make in and of itself. They said I don't have the quote in front of me, but for a white and African American individual of the same everything, so background, height, imagine they're totally identical. They then said there was a disparity. But the report also said we were not able to obtain and use socioeconomic data. And so there's a standard question of the coupling between racial disparities and socioeconomic disparities. Now, there's a whole side depth of loaded terminology there. But what that spawned was this evidence-based decision-making team saying, okay, we've got the report, thank you. We need to go deeper, and we need to really dig in on this issue. They said this was the thing, and again, their terminology in the report was socioeconomic. The report said we need to do better on this to really make a good statement for you. And so EBDM said, hey, UVA data science, let's go. Let's dig in, let's figure out what's going on. And so the next thing that my data science students are going to be on as part of the CJDTI is trying to dig into that space that the report couldn't get to. And that then, in turn, gets straight to the question of, are we experiencing disparities in the criminal justice system based on, and then they said, well, since we got you guys doing it, why don't we make it a whole host of categories as opposed to just one category? So I've got a whole list of things that we've got to get through.
By disparities, do you mean like just the type of people that are in the system, or like disparities within the carceral system that they're facing?
So the classic example that people love to do but is fraught for many reasons would just be to say, what's the base rate in the general population of the community, and what's the base rate in the population that is incarcerated at the local jail? So that would be where you would start, and then you go from there. So for example, one thing that they looked at was in the bond process. Unfortunately, that's a little tricky because Virginia is a state with a magistrate system, and the consultants, they have an office in Richmond, but they're from Florida, and they didn't take the magistrate system into account when analyzing the bond process. So it's stuff like this, and you really got to get your hands in the weeds.
For our wide audience, what are real-world effects that you hope to see on the criminal justice system through this research?
In 1997, Charlottesville instituted the second drug court in the state of Virginia. I say that as just one example, but our local community actually, and in particular the EBDM, has this community of trust that enables things to happen here that can't necessarily happen elsewhere. Imagine what I've been discussing happening in Chicago, my hometown. We can often pilot and develop things here that then reach across the state. So we had a similar effort with a therapeutic docket, which is someone has a mental health crisis. And how does the criminal justice system treat that person? What we did, this is again in the systems phase of the project, was dig in, understand, and then go on to establish a docket and then win federal funding to support that docket. Another example, this is from the jail population, for example. We actually went to Richmond, this is led by the superintendent of the jail, and lobbied for a change in the law around court fees and their reporting structure. Because what was actually uncovered was this loop of court fee traps, which will sound nebulous, but it's too funny not to share. Someone would be in jail because they didn't pay their court fees. You may say, why? Well, they were driving on a suspended license. And if you're driving on a suspended license, we hit you with these fees. Then you say, why was their license suspended? And then you find out it's because they didn't pay their court fees. And on it goes. The case had a piece that just went to the United States Supreme Court this year, 2025. This is the kind of impact that we see coming out of these projects. We find something here in Charlottesville, we poke at it, we investigate it, we figure out what's going on, and sometimes we wind up going to Richmond and saying, hey, there's something real here and the law should change, and then the whole state can benefit. One of the things we talk about when policy is being made, and I'm not making the policy, I'm the data guy, is if you were to take the news and look at the volume, so to speak, on different people, there's a lot of volume on the perpetrators of crimes. Lots of coverage on that, both in the good direction and in the bad. You often don't hear people advocating for the perspective of victims, witnesses in particular don't get often advocated for as much. But it runs the whole range all the way down to the citizen that lives here that pays taxes. The citizen who lives here who has their community be in a different place. And the thing that we try to look for is something that wins across the board. And so if you look, for example, at the jail population, we'd start every meeting where the previous criminal justice planner would write up on the board the cost of a bed day at the jail. And at the time it was about $90. When we bring that number down, not only is there a person, in the way that we do it, we like to think people who were incarcerated don't need to be. For example, the court fees issue is a great example of someone who were incarcerating, and it really is not really helping anyone. But we get them out of there, everybody right there just saved $91 a day. And so that's something that will make someone who watches your city budget happy. The person themselves, for just to pick one component of it, is not experiencing the mental health hit of being incarcerated. You could talk about a whole host of things, but that's one. You look at the families of victims, in particular, people who were in mental health crisis who'd be incarcerated, were not being improved necessarily, when in fact sometimes treatment could be a lot better. Those individuals who go through our therapeutic docket are actually now directed to mental health services. So that's improving. The family member's life is improving. When you look to how things impact victims or witnesses, having a place where those people are advocated for and we can actually look at their impact. And then you've got, the people who work at the jail, the people who work at the police department. And so I really to think about all of the different humans and all the different hats that those humans wear who are involved in the system. And I like to think about it local, but it spreads. And if we figure out a right mix here and we can share, then it can help other communities too. Oftentimes the perspective of witnesses is not taken into account. It's often something that doesn't get the airtime it deserves. And that's something we do talk about and I appreciate.
We asked Peter about the impact that the Jefferson Trust funding has had.
The award was granted in January, and we have gotten 2 papers out since then at a conference, including one winning best paper in its track.
Can you tell us about those 2 papers?
One of them was looking at the process from when you're first arrested to when you have your first court appearance, understanding all the people involved, all the locations involved, all the resources involved, how long it takes, how many steps are involved, that whole process. The other one was looking at police department traffic enforcement data and building a dashboard so that the higher up officers at the police department could understand more readily what was going on. And this is something that came straight from Chief Kochis saying in meetings, there are a few things I really care about and really need to see. And then it worked down so that we were in partnership with the crime analyst who normally prepares like their CompStat briefings and stuff like that. And so my students were interacting with him to figure out what's the kind of stuff that you don't have time to put together and how could we present that. And then now in the summer, I'm spending time looking for opportunities, looking for funding, building some materials, and then we'll hit the ground running in the fall. So there'll be a new systems engineering capstone team. I've got 2 returning data science students. I got a couple of recruits coming. And then the only other thing that's new in the moment, this is in that summer exploration mode, is I've got a couple lines with the university police department, both initiated by them, interestingly enough, thanks in part to the Jefferson Trust profile. And so one is looking at, and this is very early stage conversations, but they have a partnership with the Morehouse College Police Department. And they're looking at setting up like a home and away AI training effort, and they've asked me to be involved. I think that could be a nice partnership. And then also there's a master's in public safety. And so I've been talking to some of the folks in the police department about ways that we could collaborate and help out with that program. Just because the Jefferson Trust funding came and gave a little bit of profile and energy, that I've really been able to have some doors open up.
How can students get involved, and how can our listeners find out more about this?
Go to my GitHub page, which is github.com/Alonzi. You'll see all my repos, and this is the one called CJDTI. And if you go there, you can see everything on GitHub, and there's also the prettier version, shall we say, for the web.
And can students get involved?
Right now, I am actively recruiting, and I'm always willing to have a conversation and talk to anybody. So I would say, get in touch with me, let's talk, let's see what's going on. And I've found there's usually some way that we can make things work if people are willing to put in the energy.
Pilot Projects, Stories from the Jefferson Trust, is a Sound on Grounds podcast. Sound on Grounds is sponsored by a Jefferson Trust grant, as are all the projects featured in this season of Pilot Projects. You can find more Sound on Grounds podcasts at www.virginiaaudio.com/soundongrounds. Today's episode was engineered and recorded by Sarah Bastinelli and me, Jason Evans Groth, both in the UVA School of Data Science and the Robertson Media Center audio studio. It was written and edited by Sarah and me, Jason Evans Groth. The Pilot Project's show cover was designed by UVA alum Karina Valachi. Original music used in this episode was written and recorded by me, Jason Evans Groth, in the Robertson Media Center audio studio. Thanks again to Professor Peter Alonzi for sharing his story with us.